Hey everybody, welcome from Quarantine Central. This will be the first of a video in terms of just giving some introductory stuff before we do each unit itself. So I'm going to get my face off here and start off with a little bit of background in terms of Italian neorealism. I'm going to pull this up. From it, you all are going to be watching. Oops, sorry. You're going to be watching Bicycle Thieves. I have it wrongly listed as The Bicycle Thief, which was what it was originally known as and sort of mistranslated, but it actually goes as Bicycle Thieves. And actually, I would like you to even think about that, of why the film goes by that name, why it was changed, translated differently in American, how it reflects better the film Bicycle Thieves than Bicycle Thief. All right, anyway, in terms of Italian neorealism, some of you might have went over this before. In other classes. So, excuse the redundancy, but it's an extremely important period of filmmaking that I cannot overstate its influence upon the present day, with films like The Florida Project really being influenced by things like Italian neorealism, among many other type of films itself. It emerges, well, I should just say, during the 1930s, realism is being challenged in all different kind of strata of media, right? Meaning like literature, theory, art, etc. Italian neorealism is sort of the outgrowth of this cinematic thing. But really, as the world's transforming tremendously, all throughout the early 20th century, but particularly the 1930s, as World War II sets in place, the Spanish Civil War sets in place, a massive economic depression sets in place across various countries with different times. Ours is October 1929 in the US. And the rise of fascism is taking place, right? There's a fundamental need to kind of re-examine how we understand things as being realistic and the ways in which art can portray it. So it's, really important to have a sense of that in relationship to the emergence of Italian neorealism itself. As I have here, right, only Italian industry is relatively left intact with its production facilities, with the massive bombing going on at that time. Cinecittà is the name of the studio system, and like many countries across the globe, they're refashioning their cinema industry, right? The Italian government is refashioning its cinema industry for wartime propaganda. We do this in the United States with the Office of War Information, and you might have heard about that. Frank Capra was leading that unit of the Why We Fight series, and a series of different directors were part of it. George Stevens, John Ford, etc., so on and so forth. Netflix did a documentary on 5 of the American directors who returned after the war and how they were sort of fundamentally changed, called 5 Came Back. Germany was refashioning its own cinema industry for wartime propaganda. England was doing the same, and Italy was no different. In 1936, Mussolini, who was the dictator by that time of Italy, ordered the establishment of a national film school, or the Centro Sperimentale della Cinematografia, right? Experimental cinema, cinematography, and authorized the construction of Cinecittà, right? The kind of national, central film production house that Italy was doing at that time. And they were producing, wartime kind of propaganda, not reflecting at all the realities of Italy, how heavily bombed it was, so on and so forth. One of the biggest kind of genres at that time was called calligraphism, which David Cook reads about. And which reminds me, by the way, I have listed only pages 275 to 280 for you to read. I would like you to read from Cook 275 to 285, please. So if you can, just change that a little bit. Read from David Cook from page 275 to 285. I'll also write it in my email that I send to you about this. But as I mentioned, one of the popular genres was calligraphism at the time, which was kind of a decorative spectacle film, often taking place in the late 19th century, early 20th century, that glorified great leaders, was very kind of costume drama driven and kind of detached from reality. So you can imagine there's this disconnection in Italy between the lived reality of like bombed out buildings, food shortages, random death, and destruction, fascist takeover in many ways, from the actual um, things that people saw on the screen, which was a lavish country, proud, nationalistic, so on and so forth. So let me just move forward here. Cesare Zavattini is really one of the founders of Italian neorealism. He is a scriptwriter who works for Zavattini and will be the scriptwriter for Bicycle Thieves. And like many of the Italian neorealists, are Marxists, which was an active, counter revolt against the occupation of Italy, Germany, etc. Many people of the resistance, which you might have heard, were from Marxist socialist backgrounds and opposed it. And mind you, the Soviet Union was our ally during World War II, right? It was part of the Allies. So communism at that time was really not perceived as this evil enemy, but actually united in the fight against fascism, right? Which mainly the countries of Italy, Germany, and Japan kind of represented that. So Zavattini wrote this great quote: "The war and the liberation had taught filmmakers to discover the value of the real, right? The need to kind of get back in touch with everyday type of reality and challenging these calligraphism films, as I have listed here itself, and sort of challenge the artificiality of plot. I can't overemphasize enough sort of the democratizing force that Italian neorealism has. And there's two aspects of it I really would like to emphasize. And some of this you might know, right? But one is in terms of content and plot, right? In other words, if we want to focus on everyday people's lives, and particularly the most marginalized, children, the elderly, women, the poor, if we want to focus on these parts of people's lives, we have to find new ways to film them, because the ways in which film is often done has nothing to do with our lives, right? Our lives are not exciting. It's not like a Batman movie where the plot is constantly driving forwards, where there's really interesting dialogue going on. We live fairly humdrum lives. We wake up, we go to work maybe we don't, we look for a job, you know, we kind of stumble through our daily life, return, maybe have a dinner with the family, a loved one, so on and so forth, and go to sleep. It's not much of a narrative arc in that. So Italian neorealism really wants to fundamentally change the way in which films are shot and done. So you might have heard this, right? One, they want to shoot mainly not on sets. They want to go into actual people's living conditions to do this. Two, they often want to use non-actors who are starring in them. They feel actors have had kind of a artificial way of presenting themselves. So they want actual people in the films, right? And their argument is somebody who is actually hungry and poor doesn't really have to pretend to be that on the film. They can relay that pretty well. Somebody who's a child in real life and poor can relay that easily and doesn't need to learn acting for that itself. And with the Bicycle Thieves, you'll see the main characters are played by non-actors. Um, Finally, they want a really minimalist plot, right? Bicycle Thieves is a good example. Let me just get to it. Um, how it exemplifies a lot of these kind of tenets of Italian neorealism: being shot on location, main roles played by non-actors, a minimalist script. Um, right, the plot seems really simple. A guy gets a job, he needs a bicycle for the job, his bicycle gets stolen, he looks for it. And that's the plot. Not very exciting, right, if you kind of just talk about it. So you're going to see how the film itself transforms into this kind of really interesting, engaging way of entering this person's life. Sabatini is often uh, wished to do, an hour and a half of a person's life, just following that person around, and we'd say that would be kind of the most neorealist film we can make, ever was. Nonetheless, Bicycle Thieves was hugely influential. You might have heard of it. I'm sure many of you have, maybe, although you might not have seen it. If you have seen it, it's worth definitely viewing again. It won the 1949 Academy Award for Best Picture. And as we will see throughout this unit, hugely influential on other films that we're going to see coming on this time, and neorealism in general, right, being influential at this time. We're going to watch other films from roughly around the same period, 47 and 48, to see sort of how this neorealist aesthetic is sort of spreading across the globe, not just in Italy, but we'll see one film shot in the US and one film shot in Japan. The accompanying readings, aside from David Cook, is Andre Bazin, a very classic film theorist who you might have read in your film theory class if you've had it before. Bazin's one of the founders of Cahiers du Cinema and was really influential in terms of the French New Wave. Francois Truffaut, one of the French New Wave directors, dedicates his film, one of his first films, to Andre Bazin, who was like a mentor to him. And Bazin was one of the first people to really start championing Italian neorealism. So I wanted to go back to the source and some pieces he wrote about the bicycle thief, which it was known by then, right? You'll see it's called Bicycle Thief, but like I said, it's now called Bicycle Thieves, and what he has to say about it. So I want to highlight a couple things he says and make you think about this while you screen the film yourself. You're going to watch this before the day of class, before Tuesday's class, and you'll be writing a response on the discussion board to it. I have you reading two pieces by Bazin. They're both all part of one file, so don't try to look for two separate files. They're all part of one. In one of the pieces, Bazin speaks about imminence in the film, right? So I want you to ask yourself, what does he mean by this? And what scenes illustrate it? Imminence. What does he mean by that? And how does the film illustrate it? Another concept, and I really love this, he comes up with this notion of love, not in a simplistic way as love between two people, but he means it in a much more profound sense, right? So I want you to ask, what does he mean by this, right? In a non-trivial sense or a non-sort of couple sense. And again, what scenes illustrate his notion of love? How can we see it manifest itself within the film? And then finally, he speaks of Bruno, the kid of the film, as sort of its moral center. So again, what does he mean by this? And what scenes illustrate it? Hope you enjoy the film, and I look forward to reading your responses when you post them. See you later. Bye-bye.